You know, what's funny is that I don't know if I don't know if I mentioned this in any of my interviews, but I have aphantasia.
Is that like where you see colors or something like
No, I
that?
have the opposite of that. I can't see anything in my brain.
You don't picture stuff or have an inner
No,
dialogue or anything
no.
like that?
Those are not necessarily tied together, but I also don't have the inner dialogue. So why like the dialogos thing to me is magic to me because it literally just like none of what I'm saying is prepared except like the definition that I read just now. Like it's all and why I have such an instinctual distaste for politicians that just like sound nice but are kind of full of shit is because I couldn't memorize a speech if I wanted to.
So I don't even now I feel like I have so many more questions.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So
It
when
it,
you
it,
read
it,
to
it,
your
it really does affect my
I've
worldview.
heard of people that have that condition. I just have never no, I don't know if I'd ever met one before you. So when you look at a book, you can read it, right? Like you're not reading it out loud.
Yeah, I can read it. I have the opposite of photographic memory. It's in I have in general. It's hard for me to have like I memorize very few quotes, right?
Sure.
We have friends like, oh, Francis Bacon once said, blah, blah. It's like I can't do that, or I'd have to really struggle for that.
How did
But
you do computer programming?
it was, it really was like it helped to have good tools where you could find the file that you needed to edit and like I think there's just more and it's probably only easier and easier, but I have an interesting brain where I have to be really immersed in whatever I'm learning to be able to get into this flow state that is not even conscious necessarily, right? So when I was like the fastest promoted, I definitely wasn't the best, but I was like, but for whatever it was, I was like tied for first in terms of like fastest promoted Google.
Super successful, right? It's not easy to get the job you got at Google.
Yeah, and I was shipping like a shit ton of code because I just like when I it was literally like started. It sounds weird, but it's like it became like a part of me because I would just
You're going through loops of sorts then. Like that's the only way I can imagine it working, where like you're reviewing what you're trying to do, you're reviewing the code, and you solve the differentiation or something like that, like just through continuous loops like that.
yeah, just it's really helpful to be uninterrupted and just working yeah in a way that enables me to even be in a flow state. But
But
I
if I
guess
say picture Clifford the Big Red Dog, you
oh, I
don't come
can't.
up with a red dog in your head.
I can't see my parents. I can't see myself,
Wow.
which is
How
also
when
interesting,
did you
right?
realize that this was a thing, that you were different somehow?
This was like 5 years ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago.
So this is in your adult life you've realized this.
Yeah, very recent actually, and it helped me explain a lot of things like why I can be like it to not be self-conscious when I'm like at a party or something. There's other things that you have to get over. But what I realized was like a lot of people would be imagining what they look like, and I can't, right? So just it would help me to not have to worry about that.
Like
And
when
like,
you're pausing though and looking around, what are you doing?
what do you mean?
Right there, you're just like,
Oh
I
yeah,
would.
yeah.
You're pausing, it looks like you're thinking, what's going on?
I'm just that ideas are going through my brain, but there's no audio visual component to it.
I don't even know how to imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, like I don't like wow. Huh.
So
Is
look,
there a way
ultimately,
you can contextualize what it is to you though, how you experience thoughts then?
yes. Let me see if I can pull up something like I've written about it. Okay. It's very helpful for me to have routines that I guess speaking of loops, right? I really rely on why it's so natural for me to think about processes and where processes are defective because I'm so dependent on them. So every week I'll go through the same things. Like, okay, answer this question, answer this question, and I'm like, I almost have like software for my own life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because otherwise I'd be relying on my own memory of okay, how do you plan for this coming week? And so I'm like, I'm cataloging all these different things that I think are useful for me in the future. I have lists of so many different things, like products that I encounter, book recommendations. I'll never remember a book otherwise that someone says, like in a conversation. I usually take notes on almost every important meeting that I have. just so that I can reference it. It's like, okay, when's the last time I met John, right? And what did we talk about? I can go back on that.
But like when I prompt you on what you said during a conversation with John, it comes up to you.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
Yeah. So this is there's a lot I could say about how this affects like what I am doing right now and why it makes sense that I'm doing what I'm doing relative to a hypothetical version of myself that didn't have aphantasia. I can't not be like authentic because whatever I do say, like even literally what I'm saying right now, it's just coming out of my mouth. I'm not seeing like a script and like editing in real time. Like
during this conversation, I'm contemplating different avenues that I can go down with you and what the potential consequences and what might work well and what might not, just to make it a good conversation. I'm trying to pay attention to things like how frequently I interrupt you versus let you keep going kind of thing. Are those things that, what does that bring forth for you when you hear that?
so I almost feel like there's a if I want to be conscious of something like that, like how many times I'm interrupting, how long am I speaking, I'd have to like set an intention to do that. And okay, yeah, I don't know. I think social interaction is was definitely a challenge when I was growing up, and it's definitely not the easiest thing for me, especially when there's like multiple people in a room,
Sure.
because and that's not I'm not going to just blame that entirely on like aphantasia. It's like just how different people's brains work. But I think what helped me I think what I tend to prefer and what works well for me is being very man is like doing enough reps of whatever I want, however I want to perform in a, almost like a manual way. So if I'm analyzing like a tweet and like thinking about how this would be received by different people, like across the political spectrum or something, I'll do that manually, and then over time, my brain will just automatically, like, it's almost like a program that's like red flag or not, whether this
Hmm.
would be well received or not by all these different audiences. I'm not seeing like a table of check mark X. It's just like happening, and like I'll have if I want to, I can list it out on paper and be like, yep, my my intuition was correct. What the intuition, which was a product of doing that hard work initially, worked out. Well, it's often very hard for me to. It's like impossible for me to follow multiple threads of conversation at the same time.
Yeah, multi-threading is very different. Like that's most people don't do that well whatsoever. That's, but it's like it sounds like you also it also will be challenging, like listening to somebody and coming up with a thought at the same time.
Yeah, that seems right. I think.
Huh. Okay. That's yeah. It's funny because one of the things like I'm the opposite of that.
I'm
Like
really bad at. I think I'm really bad at multitasking.
yeah. Most people aren't as good as they think they are at multitasking, right? Nobody's really good at it. Your brain typically, but it's like I know Ace pointed this out in our last podcast with him. It's like, I have a very hard time shutting off what's the inner dialogue and the processing, even while we're having a conversation. Like I do a little bit of both at the same time. And when I'm listening to somebody, that inner dialogue is almost always running and doing comparisons and what have you, processing in some way, like generating ideas based upon what I hear. And from what I'm hearing from you, like that's just not much of a thing that you do.
Yeah, I've been told I can be a really good listener or a really bad one based on whether something else is on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like, and we all do that to an extent, but
I
yeah.
I think it is like particularly extreme for me,
Yeah.
which
I'm
for
not doubting you, by the way.
yeah.
Like I can kind of observe it, like
Mm.
a bit. Like it's not what you're saying doesn't surprise me. It's only surprising in the way that I've never had that explained to somebody by somebody who experiences it before.
For sure. It's been such a helpful exercise for me to think about what this uniquely suits me for. I even created this is actually kind of funny to and you can definitely edit a lot of this because this is some of this is kind of boring because I just spent a lot of time saying nothing. I created this game called Our Magic Within, which didn't really had no intention of starting as a game. And it's a very simple game. but I just sent it to you.
Cool.
But it sprouted from me being really interested in like how my brain was different from other people. I think that's so important for people to think about, to understand how they're different from other people, because you are uniquely suited for different things.
Yes, very much.
So I have friends that like can do UI design in their brain. I
Yeah.
can I couldn't do that. Like I can somehow do is, again, like how would I even describe it? I can what I can easily do is be like, yeah, this is a really, this branding and this storytelling is really good, and it's very compelling, and that's something I could do, but just like looking right and just, or just, oh, this art is really nice.
Yeah. I don't have nearly as much of that. It's not as, yeah, not in the same way other people who are good at that do. I wonder if that's why you're so good at these scripts and 1 minute explainers. Cause like when you bang those out, when you listen to them, it's like, those are crisp. Those are
Thank you.
really
Yeah,
good.
every single word is carefully chosen. Yeah, I mean, it's because like my brain is like considering the alternatives like in real time when I'm like typing it out. Okay, you know, this could be worded better, because I like the game of forcing it to be in a minute as well. And I just know that, just from experience, that this is just not something that people are often good at. And so it's okay
Yeah.
if this kind of stuff is needed, then, and you kind of enjoy it and you think it's valuable for the world, maybe you should do it more. And so I started to collect all these different questions, and the listeners might be interested in what kind of questions. Okay, can you remember numbers easily? So
Yeah.
people that are in finance, like, you better be able to freaking remember numbers easily and just do calculations in your head. I can't do that. Can you conjure up in front of you,
Object rotations. Like
object rotation?
yeah.
Can you imagine, okay, your Beyonce stage designer, like, you better be able to in your head. Otherwise, you're probably not the best to do that, because some people can do that, right?
Yeah.
I met this person the other day who was saying that she really loves designing the interior of her apartment. I'm like, okay, can you like almost be like a bird and look down upon our conversation right now? Because I knew that she could, because and not everyone can do that, actually.
Yeah. Have you
So
ever heard of this woman? I'm trying to remember her name, but she's like autistic. She does work with designing things that cows and bulls and stuff go through before while they're going to be processed, basically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. And she's
Wow.
it's like Grandel Templeton or something like that. I'll have to look it up. But it's like what you're
Like in a relatively ethical way.
she says she's on the spectrum somewhere, and she's clearly a little odd. um but like she, for some reason, like all these big companies hired because she's able to get into the mind of the bull, and she designs these systems that
No,
just
no, I mean,
work for these.
I believe it. I
Yeah,
believe it.
yeah, that just was what it reminded me of. I think you might want to check. Grandin Templeton, I think, is the name.
Like, I think autistic people, I feel like I'm mildly autistic, honestly. Like my brother brought it up for the first time 2 years ago, and it's just, oh wow, maybe that's
I
a,
wouldn't guess that, having spoken to you. I do. It doesn't
well,
surprise me to hear your brain works a little bit differently than most people's from how you were describing, but I'm no, what do I know?
okay. I don't know. I don't even care. I don't even necessarily care. I just know that I think the more important thing is that people's brains work very differently,
Yeah.
and we should not have. We should take advantage of that. You should take advantage of that for
Yes.
yourself and recognize that it might surprise some people to be like, there's some, for almost everyone, for certain kinds of careers that you do, it's like almost no one can do what you do even if they tried.
Yeah.
So you should pick the ones where you have this unique advantage in.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, for sure.
some people have like more talents, like that's like the luck of the draw. Like, you, like, a random or not so random thing like my family history puts me in a really positive position
Yeah.
to be an advocate for America. And so you start to really just understand like who you are, and it's like, okay, if I were to design like video game characters, because a lot of people can't really get out of their own body, like the ego's so tied up, and it's like, okay, imagine like you were designing like a video game character, would you have them play the role that you're currently playing right now? It's actually kind of feels off. So, okay, what else
Yeah.
should they be doing? For example, there's people that like they can recreate, like they can just they can imagine like their favorite meals, and they can smell the meal, they can taste the meals, right?
Yeah.
And so culinary sort of professions could be really good for them. right? It's similar, and also like there's some people that can reimagine any smell, and then they can even combine smells. And so, what does that sound like? Someone that can make perfumes,
Yeah.
right? So there's so many different dimensions of how human brains work, and
We all seem to have these like unique emergent properties that are they're similar to others but are just us that you need to try to fit into the right role for you in life.
100%. And it's always a work in progress. But I think one of the things that I like to do with this game whenever I do play it with people, it's just literally just asking questions like this, is helping them appreciate that there's a lot more to understand about themselves, which is like fun. And then it's also differences are cool, right? The differences are really valuable, right? So there's like more pathological ways that you can talk about diversity, but there's so many different elements of diversity within across us, right? There's so much more than the pigmentation of your skin, right?
Oh, completely. Like it's one of the most short-sighted, myopic ways of viewing the diversity of people is some sort of projection about the shape and color of your body, like in very uninteresting ways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, what is it? I guess any final thoughts?